Hello again. I'm here tonight with my pet deck for Artisan, Dovin's Acuity. It is the culmination of 3 cards that I'm a big fan of. So it's one that I frequently play a lot at the midweek magics. And after some interest shown into it, albeit from having shared the tournament playlist, to people actually watching it and going, oh hey, it's been mentioned, I want to hear more about this, or actually looking at my profile, something I'm not really used to. Here's the list in its current form. Now this is after sharing the list in the Discord and having a bunch of cool suggestions and ideas thrown around about it. Those were really fun, and it was interesting trying not to just wall up and be like defending every single card choice. No, there's some great suggestions there, and I'm trying to keep an open mind, and especially a perspective of the prior list being one that I had 2 slots that would pretty much be the only things that really changed in between events. It was no, it's a pet deck. You get attached to it as it is, and all that jazz. So again, this is a fairly dramatic change from where it once was. I'll probably show the old list later. If I remember. But forgive me, it's a little early in the morning for me right now, so if I yawn or something like that, it happened. So anyway, without further ado, the deck's built around Dovin's Acuity, which at its essence gains its life and draws a card anytime we play an instant on our turn. Anytime's a bit of a stretch because we've got to recast the Acuity each time, but it's a way of getting what I like to call incidental value. Extra bonus. Get a bonus from things that we're casting over the course of the game and rewarding us for having a lot of lands, which means this is a deck that likes to hit its land drops a lot. I'm running 3 now. I used to run 4, but one of the suggestions was Union of the Third Path, which is like a one-shot boost of Acuity. Notably able to trigger the Acuity itself, and depending on situations, gain us more life. We changed up our land. We don't have life gain lands anymore, so I'm hoping this extra life boost will help make up for it. Where it used to stand with the old deck is I used to have more Faithful Mending, another life gain spell in itself, and of course that 4th Acuity. So we were trying it out. I don't know if this is the right number. I don't think whichever. I need to actually test this thing out, from where it's currently standing. So that's the heart of the deck right there, is being able to get more out of our instance and just outvalue and outgain our opponent over the course of the game. So with that out of the way, how do we win the game? Our plan A is Static Discharge. It's a card that deals 3 damage from the start, and then every time you cast the card after that, it's dealing a greater amount of damage. 3 damage, 4 damage, 5 damage, 6 damage over the course of the game. So early game, we use this on creatures, and as it's growing up, and then late game, when we've got the board under our control, we start throwing it at our opponent, and it shouldn't take many to kill them at that point. If they're a life gain deck, it'll last a bit longer, but because these things grow over time, each one you're doing is taking bigger and bigger chunks of life out of your opponent. There's only 4 in the deck, but we're using Gaea's Blessing to shuffle them back into the deck. So, the first Gaea's Blessing can get up to 3 Static Discharges, shuffled back into our library, and then we draw a card to, have a chance at drawing one of the things we just shuffled in. Any Gaea's Blessings after that will shuffle the one currently in the graveyard in, plus 2 discharges if possible. It's just recycling the discharges for reuse. Incidentally, if our opponent is playing a graveyard-based deck, we can screw with that a little bit by, tossing some of their graveyard-relevant cards back into their deck. Good luck reanimating something that's currently buried under 20 cards. Something like that. And lastly, because I'm not a big fan of mill decks, they just seem to get me every time in the weak magics. The last ability of this card shores us up about against that without us having to worry about counterspells. So that's a thing. I used to run Clear the Mind originally, and then I graduated to Witness the Future, which is a very similar effect to Blessing, except we get to look at the top of our deck and such like that. But the fact that this can't be countered, the last ability can't be countered when it goes off, is really what sold it to me. There is a incidental benefit to running it with Improbable Alliance. So it kind of fits a little bit better. At the cost of digging a little bit harder with Witness the Future. Previously, with a different mana base, the Lifelands, again mentioned, were cut from this deck. It was harder to cast this card. Hopefully it's a little easier now, so that's why I'm comfortable calling it my a form of anti-graveyard shenanigans. Okay, moving on. Up in this little column, we've got Blink effects. Blink of an Eye and Into the Roil are combined, that third card I was talking about. I was stoked when I saw the functional reprint of Blink of an Eye and then the straight-up reprint of Blink of an Eye. Good times there. I don't know why I like it so much. I played it in a completely different form of a knowing deck to this one. And, just good memories of it and that deck, which doesn't exist on Arena and I doubt ever will. Well, I don't know. Doubt's a strong word. But we're talking old Ravnica Kamigawa, Time Spiral, somewhere around there. Yeah, 'cause, Blink of an Eye was a Time Spiral card, so... yeah, I'm not sure, but it's at the rate we're going and, going all the way up to Pioneer or whatever, I don't think we'll see that deck. That's neither here or there. Here, the main goal is to stall our opponent. They bounce something that requires significant resources to replay. Going back to that Reanimator deck, they just reanimated a big thing. Costs 8 mana to play. Well, send it back to their hand. Now they've got to go through the hoops again. Your dumb green deck just paid 5 mana to play a 5/4 that draws a card when it dies. Well, guess what? It's not going to die. We're sending it back to your hand. Do it again. It's all about just buying time while we are setting up. And in the case of decks that have multiple cards that interact with each other, or throws a bunch of auras or equipment on a certain creature, you can just send it back and make them do it all over again. An annoyance tactic, I guess you could call it. And to that end, Arrester's Admonition is just kind of fits in between the blinks. 2 mana, you don't get a benefit beyond just bouncing something. 3 mana, you get your benefit if you do it on your turn, of course. And then, of course, 4 mana, you get your card draw off these guys. So it kind of just fills in the slots, I guess you could say. Also, if you suspect your opponent has a removal spell for Dovin's Acuity, and you haven't quite timed it out that you're ending your turn with Dovin's Acuity back in your hand, then these guys can kind of help protect it a little bit. Admonition can't, but all 6 of them do trigger Acuity, so that's a helpful thing for them. Up here, we've got a little bit of removal. We got Fire Prophecy. 3 damage to something. It helps you filter through your deck a little bit. Draws you a card afterwards. Pretty straightforward card. We're trying to dig through our deck to find the Acuities or the Discharges or whatever solution we need to a given scenario that we've been presented with. Flame Sweep is a way to slow down the aggressive decks by killing little dorky creatures. Clears things off, and hopefully you don't need that Fire Prophecy to finish the job on a creature that was annoying you. There's incidental benefit beyond just it's an instant, so it works with Dovin. It also does not touch the only creatures this deck generates. Honden and Infinite Rage, Cleansing Fire, and Calm Waters are a thing that you can play things you can play after you stabilize a little bit that give you incremental advantage throughout the game until, you secured your win. I know there's I have some friends who are not big fans of Hondens. They just get annoyed by them, just the constant type thing. The constant every turn they're doing something. So that's extra encouragement in a deck like this to play with them. In theory, I used to run more in the deck. There was the white Honden that cost 1 mana that could tap a creature. That ability saw so little play. Its whole purpose in the deck was to be an early drop that eventually made these guys better. I don't think it's necessary. Oh no, I'm only dealing up to 3 damage a turn with Infinite Rage. That's usually enough, especially when paired with some of the other stuff in here. So, anyway, Infinite Rage, it could be considered a secondary win con because over the course of a game, you're just steadily dealing damage to your opponent or their creatures, knocking them off the board and then hitting them in the face. You'll work your way up there. Did I mention I'm tired? Anyway, Cleansing Fire is good for stabilizing against the aggressive decks because you can gain up to 6 life a turn off it just for having it on the field with its friends. And then Sanctum of Calm Waters is used to draw more cards over the course of the game. Filter through the deck. Even just by itself on the board, drawing that extra card is handy. This is a deck that likes to hit its land drops. Of course, if you're at 4 land, you're doing pretty good. But they keep it coming. And that extra draw trigger helps a little bit with Improbable Alliance again. We'll talk about it, touch more in a minute. I used to have the Honden of, Seeing Winds? I've got it in my sideboard because I wanted that as a reference. Honden of Seeing Winds, that's right. Did I have the other one in here too? No, I cut that one. Okay. Because, Arena won't let me save a deck when it's got more than 15 cards in the sideboard. I just want it in there for the purpose of talking about it here in this video. I'll cut it after. Arena's like, no! And I could have just added it for this recording. Anyway, neither here nor there. Honden of Seeing Winds, the one that is a mandatory you draw X cards, X equal to your shrines. Great card. Opponents love to kill it and just, forget about your Acuity, which is giving you the real value over a game. I mean, that's actually a hard argument there at that point. But, it put me in a scenario where I had to be really careful about whether or not I was playing Gaea's Blessing every turn once I got to the late game, otherwise I might deck myself. Here, if it gets to that point, I can just say no. But, drawing up to 3 cards, that's a little bit more controlled than the 5, I think my max was in the past. So, it's a late game, just... It's usually these triggers, happening in the late game that cause opponents to realize they're just outvalued and they scoop. So moving along. Another one of their new cards, Blessed Alliance. Notably, if you have nothing better to do with it, you can just gain 4 life and bounce an Acuity back to your hand, and then play the Acuity to draw another card and help, get to what you need. The second ability of the Escalate, probably not doing you too much, but the third one is why I'm trying it out on here. One of this deck's weaknesses has been hexproof boggle decks, where my opponent's playing things that have hexproof, so I can't target it, and boost it up somehow, be it in the form of +1/+1 counters or enchantments. At which point I'm at a place where I can bounce your enchantments. They're only doing so much, or that's only doing so much if they're a big enough body. If they're +1/+1 counters, I can't touch it at all. And now I'm getting hit by this thing constantly. I need to play the outlife gain or the outlife plan, and that doesn't always work, especially if they get it set up early. If I can't flame sweep something with hexproof, hopefully I can at least clear the rest of the board and then force my opponent to sacrifice it now. We'll see how it goes in testing. Moving on. Faithful Mending. Gain 2 life, draw 2 cards, discard 2 cards. It's just helping with the early game setup, and has a little late game application for getting the Dovins to flip. Improbable Alliance. Whenever you draw your second card each turn, make a 1/1 blue fairy creature token with flying. And then its second ability, is a mana outlet that draws us a card and discards a card. So, this used to be a flex slot card, but I think I moved it back to main. It used to be a, I want to say it was a known interaction with Acuity in the past. I've seen many Acuity lists using it. I don't know what I'm thinking. Did I mention I'm tired? Anyway, it's just a nice way to generate creatures over time that can be used to chump big creatures to buy you time, or if they get out of control, they can start trading with things, or beating down the opponent. We'll call it WinCon number 3. WinCon C. Plan C. There we go. Figured it out in the end. We have many instances of drawing a second card on each of our turns. Faithful Mending lets me draw a second card on my opponent's turn. The Sanctum Calm Waters is a consistent, steady second card. Fiber Opsy, second card. Blink into Arister's, second card. Union, second card. Gaea's Blessing, second card. Oh yeah, did I mention Dovin's Acuity, second card. So all of them work really well with Alliance. They'll get your blue fairy token. So if you're really good with your mana, you can go turn 2 Alliance, turn 3 Acuity, and just start that engine going. Other than that, we have no creatures whatsoever in the deck. When I first built the deck, I made the conscious decision that I didn't want creatures, because that way, if I'm facing an opponent who's got removal in their hand, they've got nothing to target with it. It's just going to sit there the whole time and just annoy them because they can't do anything with it. This deck is not a very nice deck on the opponent psychologically. I'm just glad I managed to cut the Scrabbling Claws, because having that extra trigger that just hung around doing very little, no bueno for the psychology. Anyway, moving on. Over here we've got some of our singleton cards, the Rip Apart. It's, again, this is a best of 1 format, so having a couple things to help in certain scenarios is good. So Rip Apart, it functions as a removal spell if we need it to, but otherwise it destroys an artifact or enchantment. So not only can we bounce them, but we can end it for good using that, hopefully. Also, it can hit planeswalkers, notable. Another thing that hits Planeswalkers is Brittle Blast. 5 damage to 1 creature or Planeswalker, and there's a perpetual thing that just helps against some of the graveyard decks. You know, if you keep bringing something back from the dead, well, this will help keep it dead. Just hope it's not a cat, because black cats are usually sacrificed before they could get that perpetual trigger. So anyway, throw that back in the removal pile. And our third singleton piece of removal is Igneous Inspiration, and that is because, again, that's the one. We're not doing anything with our sideboard. Well, let's learn a little. So, 3 damage to any target. Please don't make it your mission in life to deal 20 damage to the opponent strictly through this card. It doesn't hurt though. So, learn, that means we have a learn sideboard. When we cast it, we get a card into our hand from here. One of these fine selections. Usually I just go with Environmental Sciences because more life gain helps make those land drops, which I've stressed are fairly important in this deck. And then the rest are just situational things for whatever's appropriate at the time. I used to run Elemental Summoning, but again, it's gotten a little easier to run green in this deck, so Containment Breach became a more viable option to me. So that's Igneous Inspiration. The mana base, pretty straightforward. We've got a mix of lands that come into play untapped, and a mix of lands that come into play tapped. Hopefully your draws will help time it right. I'm trying not to go too slow against the aggro decks. So hopefully I found a decent mix. Mileage may vary, it's a first draft, it could use some tinkering. Yada yada yada. Notable lands among them, the Thriving Islands are a way to make green for the Gaia's Blessing. Once we're comfortable with the color saturation of our other lands for Jeskai. Otherwise, use it to get what you need. You can always get green later. There's only, at best, 3 cards in the deck that use green. Later game, you might want to cast Gaia's Blessing multiple times a turn, depending on how well you're churning through your deck. But it's not a big deal early game. You probably just want the 1 green after you've got your colors set. Again, these guys are new to me compared to the life gain lands I was running earlier. We'll see how they work out. Gates of Istfell and Surtland Frostpyre are lands that enter tapped, make 1 color of mana, but can be sacrificed later on for a benefit. Istfell and Frostpyre, they've had a little bit of an in-out relationship with this deck, like a cat trying to decide if it wants to go outdoors. Frostpyre is the more consistent stays in the deck. It's just an additional wrath effect that's kind of hidden away. You know, not all opponents will pay attention to it. It only works as a sorcery, speed-wise, so be careful with that. Don't catch yourself off guard trying to wipe a board on your opponent's turn only to find out you can't, because it's not Flame Sweep. And then Gates of Istfell, draw some cards, gain some life. More of a, if you're in a desperate situation where you can't find the Acuities, and you do need that life, and you do want that card draw to dig deeper, okay, fine. Sacrifice a land, but lands are valuable here. Use them only if you need to, or are that comfortable using them, I guess. So that's the main board for this Best of 1 deck. The sideboard, again, in Best of 1, you can only use this initial 7. But I will talk about some of the other cards in here, because they're either things that are worth covering or things to consider in the future. Scrabbling Claws. Cool thing about it is players don't need to have cards in their graveyard for it to work, which means you play it on turn 1, it can just sit there and always be a perpetual priority stop. So aggravate your opponent that way. It's an annoying deck. You gotta acknowledge it when that stuff happens. And then, of course, it actually has a legit function of being an anti-graveyard card. So when I was looking at Static Discharge, I was looking at effects that had, or I was looking at perpetual effects, and some of the other alchemy stuff. And the draft thing, the drafted card mechanic seemed like a neat little thing, you know. You plop down the Celestial Vault, you just do your stuff normally, but you've got 1 mana devoted to it that you just use over the course of the game until you're ready to just take over with an Angel deck. Just not out of nowhere, it'll be obvious the whole time, but that was a consideration that ultimately I haven't decided to try. But I do keep it in the sideboard as a reminder that maybe someday, for the right deck, we could mess around with the concept. So Enhanced Surveillance is one of the discussion cards, suggestion cards from the Discord, as a way to protect my own graveyard, since it's an instant speed effect. As far as best of 1 goes, I'm not too worried about it, since the surveillance doesn't do anything outright by itself, since we don't surveil at all. So it would only be a proactive card. I'm keeping it here though because it was a good suggestion that I could see myself maybe using if I was to build a best of 3 version instead. It might be the way we keep our graveyard somewhat intact. You find some prisoners. Is one of the flex cards I've tried in the past. Sure, destroy an artifact, or more importantly, exile top 3 cards of an opponent's library. Until the end of next turn, you can cast that card without paying its mana, or without worrying about its coloring. It's a fun card. It's very much a me card because I like the chaos of just playing cards from my opponent. As far as the annoyance tactic goes, I mentioned here and there for this deck. When you're killing your opponent's stuff or bouncing it back to their hand, they're not really getting to play with their toys, are they? So now you're playing a card here that lets you play with their toys. Very much a rub-in concept. It's a nice little value thing, however, it's not a very reliable thing if you need to find an answer to a given situation. There's the yawns for sure. But anyway, I don't even know if the mic picked that up. Moving on. But anyway, it's not a very consistent card. It's not reliable. It's very much. It's very much a card that's only as strong as the opponent's deck. So, how much do you trust your opponent in best of 1? Still like the card, but not in this iteration. Rally the Throne is a former card that was in the deck as a thing that triggers Dovin's Acuity. Late game, we have the 3 mana to throw into the Adamant ability. It was the original. I'm not saying original, but it was one of the ways that we would generate tokens in the past. It's mostly there's a marker for what was, and every once in a while the check the card pool of the format for instant speed token creations that might be worth considering. I know we've got 2 very similar effects in sorcery speed, but that's not really quite doing it for me here. So moving on, the Witness the Future that we were referencing earlier, we're talking about Gaia's Blessing. The Honden Winds that we were talking about with the shrines. And the Elemental Summoning, which was the former card in the sideboard over Containment Breach. But then Breach came in, kind of knocked it out through the hole it made, hence the breaching. Anyway. Bad wordplay joke aside. when I'm making tokens with this deck, it's normally defensively. So when it came time to introduce Containment Breach, it was really just a contest between Elemental Summoning and Spirit Summoning, and both of them ranked pretty much the same, so I just went with the cheaper one that I might be able to, in theory, do in the same turn as an Igneous Inspiration, or, you know, in combination with some other cheaper thing. Because Elemental Summoning is more of a... It takes out more than a turn to cast. And, as a bonus, if I'm destroying something tiny, I get to make a pest who can then do chunk blocking or whatever. So, those are considerations or keep arounds just for right now, just for things to think about. Wow. Yeah, I know, deep. But anyway, that's the deck in a nutshell. A half-hour nutshell. Holy heck, I could ramble. Well, if you made it this far, I hope you got something out of it. I'm sure there's different ways you can go about it. Again, I mean, these 3 cards, they're for me, they may not be for you. But thanks for watching, and maybe we'll see how the deck evolves in the future. Take care. Aha! Thought I was gonna forget, did you? Well, I totally did. But right after I finished recording, I'm like, I forgot something. What's the other version of the deck? So here's my older version that I was screwing around with. As you can see, still the Sanctum of Tranquil Light. My flex slot that I mentioned earlier was entertaining the card Spellchain Scatter, which is amusing in the sense that if you use it, if you're dirtling with Dovin's Acuity, you could, in theory, use the spell kicked to cast another Spellchain Scatter to get a duplicate of the original one, and just confuse yourself as you're chaining it with Dovin's Acuity. Being extremely cute, it's very much a do-nothing card by itself when you're drawing it late game. You need something to pair it with. Always need something to pair it with. The other idea I wanted to use it with is pairing it with Static Discharge, because then you've got more things that up the starting intensity, because you're playing with more copies of the Discharge in the deck. It's interesting because anything that's conjured into the deck will not have the same intensity level as your 4 original Static Discharges. So you can get a little wonky with the numbers there. It's a fun interaction, but again, it's more just for my amusement. It's not a good choice in this deck. Those Grabbing Claws being annoying. The 1-of, again, best of 1 deck. Had more Faithless Lootings. And the other major thing about this deck was we were playing life gain lands. Now why were we playing the life gain lands? Well, it's because when we first originally built this deck, we did not have thriving lands to consider at the time, and I thought this deck needed that little bit of a life boost to get past the hurdle against aggro to finally turn the game around and just gain oodles of life with the Acuity. Has it won me some games? Sure. But being able to get a little bit more selective with the mana fixing I get when I play a thriving land, I think that's going to win more games than the overall running. And because these lands can't make green, we needed a way of doing it here, so I had cut the I'm forgetting its name now. It's the land that gains you 2 life, draw some cards. So that was cut from an earlier version of the list, and we were trying out Crystal Grotto. Gets a little bit of a card selection thing with the Scry 1. Sure, why not? Makes colorless at its base, so it's not just going to sit there sucking up mana. And then if we need it to fix something in a pinch, we can do it. But more importantly, it would help us cast Gaea's Blessing. Is it the best solution? Heck no. But it was a solution. And lastly, let's go back over the sideboard. You can see the Elemental Summoning's there. Piece It Together was a card I was considering in the deck, trying out. Since it has that starting intensity, and we could shuffle it back into our deck with Gaea's Blessing. But then, after trying it out a little bit, I finally read the card fully and realized that the only time you get an extra turn of it is when you're taking an extra turn with it. Oh, sorry. Wow. Again, did I mention I'm tired? I think that's the fourth time I have. Anyway. You only get the extra turn if its intensity is 4, meaning after you've got that extra turn, no matter how well you use that extra turn or squandered it to just basically play an Explorer, it's only going to go back to its default mode of just drawing you a card after that. So, not really worth playing, just to get the one shot out of it. Celestial Vault still, yep. Improbable Alliance, it was in that flex spot of the spell chain scatters. Rally from the Throne, Clear the Mind, kind of replaced by Witness the Future pretty easily. Since we only really want to be putting the Static Discharges back into our deck, or, some one-off shenanigan, putting the whole library in there just seems a little excessive. It was probably better when we had Honden of Seeing Winds in the deck still. And, we were drawing like 5+ cards a turn and worried about decking out. At that point, have yourself a nice discard step and next turn shuffle it all back in so, you're not too worried about things. Something like that. Anyway, this was the older form of the deck. Definitely not the original form of the deck. But, I think the changes are very noticeable. Okay, once again, thanks for watching, and take care.